Hi, I'm Kennedy Call.
And I'm Saydi Bowen.
And this week we read from the book School, The Story of American Public Education, Part 2, which covered the years 1900 to 1950, titled As American as Public School. And so once again, we're talking about the public school system in this time period. And so one big thing that affected it as part of our summary is immigration. A lot of people were coming to America, and they had been for a while, but school was a drive for people. It was a pull factor for more immigrants, and it was changing the cultural backgrounds of the immigrants. Now we were getting a lot more Jews and Russians, and so it was just changing the types of people that were coming rather than British or Scottish, Irish. It's just changing the dynamic there. And so with that just comes new cultures being added in and different ideas and thoughts and ways that people believe. And one big thing was that school was a great way for these immigrant students to assimilate into American culture and understand America better. And there was some controversy because people felt like it was taking away their own cultures. However, for the most part, they moved to America, and so it was good for them to learn the language and understand the cultures. And so while there's always pros and cons, I feel like for the most part, people generally agreed that schooling was a big pro and a reason that pulled immigrants to the nation.
School is for sure one of the big American dream things that immigrants saw. They were like, oh, they have good schools over in America, so let's go over there so our kids can get educations. I would say that was one of the main, like you said, pulls for them. And by the end of the 20th century, so this is fast forwarding, but there were about every kid going to elementary school, and about 80% were going to high school. So school rates in this century did really go up, which is good because then more people were getting an education. And schools did start to become more universal during this time. They kind of started to get a set system for everywhere, not by different states. It was kind of starting to stable out everywhere for everyone.
Yeah, which is helpful because that allowed us to slowly become more even, and that led to what my next point is, talking about the curriculum changes and the ways that they kind of altered what they were teaching in schools. So as immigration and new ideas came to be, they started changing the curriculums and started exploring more progressive ways of learning and to prepare people for jobs or other things like that. And so one lovely thing that came out of that is the SAT. We all know about that, the Scholastic Aptitude Test, and other IQ tests like that. And these were used for kind of determining who would be good to join the military and stuff like that. And now we use the SAT as college entrance exams type ideas, but it was the same idea back then. And so it's just this idea that we can test people to see where they get placed, and from that placement we can sort them to however they can go, and whether that's a good or a bad, it was kind of largely debated.
Yeah, totally. But besides the fact that there were more kids going to school, they didn't all love it because the conditions were not very good. There was still a lot of issues with teachers and with the school systems and buildings and everything, so that wasn't very good. In the early 1900s, it was still only about 50% of kids going to school, though that number did go up later on. But in Indiana, they started this system called work, study, play, and in that they would switch classrooms like we did now to give the kids more of an interactive experience, and it kept it more entertaining for them. And this is when schools really started to kind of pick it up, and people really enjoyed it for the most part, except for immigrants who didn't love that they only spoke English and they only celebrated Christian holidays. They didn't feel like that was really fair. But besides that, the schools really did start to step it up when they started this work, study, play system.
Yeah, for sure. And one other main thing that they talked about in this section was they talked a lot about how we had a lot of Germans in our country. A lot of them had come over, and they felt very strongly about their culture. They were very proud of it. They loved their language. They loved their holidays. And so a lot of German culture is very assimilated into this school culture, and so many schools were just using German as the language that they were teaching in, or they teach it at part-time. And so, but like we mentioned earlier, World War I came and they started pulling soldiers, and this time of war brought a lot of American pride. And so the presidents during this time all wanted the schools to reflect that American pride. And so a lot of the times they said, no, we have to only speak English in our schools. We're teaching English things, English books. It's that same idea of how we switched from last week, the British English to American English. It's the sense of pride that we have for our nation, and school is like the biggest way that they push that sense of pride.
Totally.
And then they also talked a little bit about, even though it wasn't really in this section as largely, towards the end of the 1940s, 1950s, this idea of the Cold War began to kind of start, and so they started doing the drills, and this sense of paranoia and caution for other countries and cultures started to come up in schools as part of this highly nationalistic, very prideful of our country influence in our schools. And so
and just to kind of wrap it up, in the 1920s, kindergarten and junior high did start to come around, which was great because it opened up a lot more schooling positions for like teachers and stuff for work. And they also started to emphasize teaching kids how to do jobs and like get job positions, which was really important too during this time. It opened up a lot more subjects for kids to study and go into. And child labor was then abolished in the 1930s, which made all kids go to school until they were 16. So that was good because then more people were getting an education. So that was what this chapter was about.
Yeah, so now we're going to move on to our praxis. So in my classroom, I really want to focus on the same idea of differentiation that they had is a good one. And so as I was reading, I was thinking about how we can improve on differentiation, and I feel like now we are a lot better at it. But in my classroom, I want to help my students understand that they can be more than even what their parents were, or even though there are those trends, you can provide them the opportunities to see that they can learn beyond what they think they are capable of. And one of those ways is differentiation. Not every student is going to be on the same level, and so by allowing them different paths to learn the same information, it's going to help them do better in school and love school more, because they'll be able to like enjoy what they're learning and not struggle so much or feel frustrated because their peers are struggling so much and they're excelling. And so finding that way to help bring them to a level of agreement with each other without taking from one or the other. And then the next thing is that I also, in my classroom as an educator, I want to include play. Especially as an elementary school teacher, it's important that kids learn through play. They learn about their environments a lot through just the way they interact with each other, with toys, with the outside world. And so discovering and playing is going to be a huge part that I want to include in my classroom to help them learn about their world and learn these topics, because everything you can learn through play. You can find some aspect that you can have a manipulative, even math. You have math manipulatives. Social studies, you go outside and you go on a field trip, or there's always some way that you can teach a concept through exploration and play.
Yeah, and for the praxis in my classroom, I'm going to make sure all kids have an equal opportunity to learn whatever they want to learn, because back then they were discriminated on a lot based off of their race, kind of what jobs they were going on to. They were like, oh, well, you're this race, so you're not as smart, so you have to be a factory worker. But in my classroom, I'm going to teach kids about everything, and they'll all have the opportunity to learn equally and be whatever they want when they get older. And along those same lines, in my classroom, I really want to make sure to prepare all the kids to be future leaders, because like I mentioned, anyone could become a leader. It doesn't matter how smart they are really, or in elementary school or anything like that. So I think it's really important that all kids will get an equal opportunity to learn how to be leaders or to be any type of profession that they want to go into, and I'll give them the best chance and the best education that I can to help them with that. So
just now we're headed into the reflection. I totally agree with that. Just helping them see who they can become and not just what people say they could be.
Totally.
So one big thing that as I was reading, I was reading and I was like, oh my goodness, they just took another step forward and then we took 5 steps back.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, 1 step forward and 5 steps back, at least it's some progression forward,
Mm-hmm.
and we can learn from those 5 steps back. And
Mm-hmm.
now we're seeing this in hindsight, and so we're learning a lot from these mistakes that our nation has made in schooling in the past. And it wasn't incredibly effective. I mean, 80% of kids didn't want to go to school. They wanted to be working in a factory because school was so bad.
Yeah.
But now we're improving the conditions. We're making it more fun. We're
Mm-hmm.
helping them see who they can become, and including more people in this formal education. And for sure, I feel like, and this time, that idea of they were able to include the immigrants and teach them, and so we can build on that too. And so that was just like a big overarching thing that I pulled from that.
Yeah, I agree. So overall, I think school was mostly promising. It did give them a chance, mostly for the immigrants, like you said, to learn and grow. And even though they were treated a little bit differently, it was a good place for them for the most part. And it was a good place for kids to be trained to get jobs and everything, even though there were a lot of things wrong with the education system. Overall, I think it was beneficial and they were starting to go in the right direction. So, yeah.
Thank you.